The Oran Intergalactic Academy stood as a testament to the galaxy's finest minds, a sprawling complex of impossible architecture, suspended between 3 moons in the Vega system. Its spires and domes housed learning chambers where the universe's brightest beings pursued knowledge beyond the comprehension of most civilizations. In its 300-year history, only 17 humans had ever graduated from its hallowed halls. Tracy Stone intended to be the 18th. The legendary Mind Maze Chamber was the final test for all senior candidates seeking elite status, a living labyrinth that reconfigured itself continuously, responding to the thoughts and strategies of those who dared enter. Tracy stood at the entrance now, the lone unaugmented human among her alien peers, all of whom possessed neural enhancements, sensory augmentations, or biological adaptations that made them uniquely suited for the challenges ahead. "Your attention, candidates," announced Professor Threxor, his 8 tentacle-like appendages rippling beneath his academic robes. The bioluminescent patterns across his cephalopod-inspired head pulsed with a stern cyan glow. "Today marks your final examination. You will enter the Mind Maze individually. Completion requires reaching the central chamber and activating the recognition sequence. The maze will test not merely your intellect, but your adaptability, resilience, and improvisation." Tracy felt the stares of her classmates, some curious, others dismissive. Her fingers instinctively reached for the small package in her pocket, a simple pack of chewing gum. Against regulations, she'd been permitted this one comfort item from Earth, deemed too primitive to offer any advantage. "And I remind you," Threxor continued, his voice resonating with authority that seemed to bypass their ears and vibrate directly in their minds, "no technological aids are permitted. The maze will detect and neutralize any implants, projection devices, or quantum calculators. You must navigate with your natural faculties alone." A murmur rippled through the assembled students. For most, their natural faculties included neural networks, enhanced memory structures, and perceptual organs humans couldn't even pronounce. Tracy, with her unmodified human brain and standard-issue senses, might as well have been a Stone Age creature thrown into a quantum physics exam. Tracy Stone. Threxor's massive eye swiveled toward her. "As our only unaugmented candidate, you may withdraw without penalty. The Academy acknowledges the inherent disadvantages of your species." Tracy straightened her shoulders and met his gaze. "With respect, Professor, I'll take the exam as scheduled." His skin flashed a brief pattern that translated roughly to amused respect. "Very well. Candidates will proceed in alphabetical order by species designation. Aven student Krillax. You will enter first." Tracy watched as her classmates entered one by one. Krillax, with his avian features and intuitive understanding of 4-dimensional space. Zorthan, the crystalline giant whose body naturally calculated probability matrices, and Neitha, the insectoid cadet whose compound eyes could perceive spectral anomalies. None emerged during the 3 hours she waited. When her turn came, Tracy approached the entrance, a circular aperture that pulsed like a living thing, its edges contracting and expanding with gentle biological rhythms. "Stone," Professor Threxor said quietly as she prepared to step through. "The maze is not merely a test of intelligence, but of adaptation. Previous human candidates relied on memorization, an inadequate strategy for a constantly changing environment." "I understand, Professor. Do you?" His skin flickered with patterns she couldn't decipher. "The Mind Maze learns from each candidate. It has encountered 17 humans before you. It knows how your species thinks." Tracy nodded, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. As the pulsating entrance dilated to admit her, she slipped her hand into her pocket and felt the rectangular package of gum. 20 pieces. More than enough, she hoped. She stepped through. The entrance sealed behind her with a soft, wet sound, like lips closing. The corridor before her stretched about 30 meters, glowing with a soft amber light that seemed to emanate from the very walls. These weren't constructed walls in any conventional sense. They appeared grown rather than built, with subtle ridges and organic patterns that reminded her of coral or dense fungal structures. Tracy took a deep breath. The air carried a faint scent of ozone and something like cinnamon. She'd researched the mind maze extensively but knew that theoretical knowledge counted for little. The maze reconfigured continuously, not randomly but intelligently, analyzing the strategies of each entrant and adapting to counter them. Her first step forward triggered an immediate response. The corridor split into 3 branches where a moment before there had been only one path. Tracy paused, considering. This was just the beginning, the maze establishing baseline parameters for how she approached choices. She removed a piece of gum from the package and began chewing thoughtfully. The familiar mint flavor grounded her, a small comfort from Earth in this utterly alien environment. After a moment's consideration, she removed the gum and pressed it against the wall at the junction, molding it into a small arrow pointing toward the leftmost corridor. "Let's start building a map," she murmured to herself. Tracy chose the left passage and proceeded cautiously. After approximately 15 meters, it split again, this time into 2 paths. She placed another gum marker, this one molded into a simple circle to indicate a standard junction, with a small depression on the side she'd chosen to follow. 20 minutes later, she had navigated through 7 junctions, leaving markers at each. The pattern seemed logical, with paths generally moving inward toward what she presumed was the center. Then she turned a corner and found herself back at her first marker, the arrow now pointing in a different direction. "Of course," she whispered. The maze wasn't just changing, it was responding specifically to her marking strategy. Tracy leaned closer to examine the altered gum arrow. The maze hadn't removed it, merely repositioned it, which meant the maze recognized the markers as meaningful to her. This was valuable information. She quickly developed a new approach, using color as an additional variable. The fruit-flavored gum in her pack came in 5 colors: red, green, blue, yellow, and purple. She established a system: red for dead ends, blue for loops that return to previous points, green for promising paths, yellow for junctions with more than 3 choices, and purple for areas where the maze exhibited unusual behavior. The shapes would indicate specific features: squares for stable areas, triangles for sections that seemed to shift frequently, circles for standard junctions. As she progressed deeper, the maze's challenges intensified. One corridor inverted gravity suddenly, causing Tracy to fall upward, clinging desperately to ridges in the wall. She managed to place a purple triangle marker before orienting herself to this new reality and proceeding downward along the ceiling. Another passage filled gradually with a thick, gelatinous fluid that slowed her movements to an excruciating crawl, rather than retreat. Tracy pushed through, leaving a green square marker with 3 indentations to indicate the viscous area. Hours passed as she methodically explored, marked, and mapped. The maze began responding more aggressively to her strategy. Sometimes her gum markers would be erased entirely. Other times they would change color, attempting to mislead her. Tracy adapted, adding secondary markers and establishing a time-based component to her system. Fresher gum had more reliable information. After what felt like 5 hours, but could have been much longer, the maze distorted her perception of time. Tracy encountered her first true trap room. The chamber appeared ordinary until the entrance sealed behind her and the walls began to contract. Staying calm, she searched for the exit mechanism while placing a red triangle marker on the contracting wall. She noticed a slight discoloration on the floor. Pressing it caused a new exit to open, and she escaped just as the room would have crushed her. The maze escalated its countermeasures. One section projected vivid hallucinations, alien predators lunging from shadows, classmates calling for help, even a false exit complete with congratulating professors. Tracy developed a verification technique, pressing her gum markers firmly enough to feel their texture beneath her fingers. If she could touch it, it was real. In a particularly challenging section, the maze walls became translucent, revealing what appeared to be shortcuts through to more advanced areas. Tracy observed other candidates struggling in distant chambers, Krillax flying frantically between closing apertures, Zorthan vibrating in crystalline distress as the floor beneath him dissolved. She realized these might be illusions designed to demoralize her, but the possibility that they were real observations couldn't be dismissed. She marked these viewing points with yellow circles containing small dots representing the number of peers visible, whether real or fabricated. These glimpses provided valuable intelligence about the maze's more advanced challenges. By her rough estimation, Tracy had been in the maze for nearly 8 hours when she encountered her greatest challenge yet. A massive chamber opened before her, its floor a series of floating platforms over a seemingly bottomless void. Each platform bore glowing symbols from mathematical systems she recognized from her studies: Rigelian calculus, Betelgeusian logic structures, Arcturian probability matrices. The platforms rearranged themselves continuously, forming briefly stable paths before dissolving into new configurations. Tracy realized this was a test of predictive reasoning, the kind her augmented classmates excelled at naturally. She would need a different approach. Studying the patterns from the entrance, Tracy noticed subtle rhythms in the movements. Rather than trying to predict the optimal path, she focused on identifying the platforms with the longest stability periods. She marked her observations on a purple square of gum, creating a crude timing diagram. When she felt confident in her analysis, Tracy moved quickly, hopping from one platform to another, never stopping for more than a few seconds. 3 times she nearly fell, saved only by desperate lunges. When she finally reached the opposite side, her heart pounding and legs trembling, she left her most elaborate marker yet, a spiral of blue and green gum twisted together, representing the successful navigation of a complex adaptive challenge. The next section brought sensory disorientation. Sound became color. Touch triggered taste sensations, and visual stimuli registered as pressure against her skin. Tracy stumbled initially, overwhelmed by the conflicting inputs. She forced herself to focus on one sense at a time, establishing a conversion system. A red pyramid marker helped her remember the translations. Blue visual patterns meant safe footing. High-pitched sounds indicated dead ends. A bitter taste sensation warned of moving walls. As she adapted to each new challenge, Tracy noticed the maze's responses becoming more sophisticated. It wasn't just countering her strategies, it was learning from them, incorporating elements of her own logic into its design. When she used a particular marking pattern to indicate safe passages, the maze began using similar patterns to highlight dangerous ones. This realization prompted Tracy to develop a meta-strategy. She deliberately left misleading markers in some areas, knowing the maze would adapt to them, then adjusted her actual navigation system accordingly. It became a complex game of misdirection and double bluffing, with Tracy constantly evolving her approach while maintaining enough consistency to navigate effectively. After what must have been 12 hours, Tracy's supplies dwindled to her last 5 pieces of gum. She'd traversed dozens of chambers, survived countless traps, and developed a marking language of remarkable complexity. Her mouth was dry from constant chewing, her fingers sticky with residue. Yet she felt a growing confidence. The maze had thrown increasingly sophisticated challenges at her, but she'd matched each one with human adaptability. The corridor she now followed spiraled gently inward, its walls pulsing with a steady rhythm that reminded her of a heartbeat. The air grew warmer, carrying a faint electrical charge that made the hair on her arms stand up. She was approaching something significant, perhaps the central chamber. The spiral passage suddenly opened into a vast spherical room. Unlike the organic corridors and chambers before, this space was perfectly geometric, its inner surface covered entirely in reflective material. Tracy stood on a narrow platform extending into the center of the sphere. Surrounded on all sides by her own reflection, hundreds of Tracys staring back at her from every angle. This was the Iris Chamber, named in the sparse accounts she'd found from previous successful candidates. The final challenge before the central hub. As she took a tentative step forward, the reflections began to move independently. Some showed Tracy failing, falling into traps she'd successfully navigated, becoming hopelessly lost, breaking down in frustration. Others displayed her augmented classmates succeeding where she had struggled, their enhanced abilities making them appear graceful and confident compared to her clumsy human efforts. "Inefficient," came a voice that sounded like Professor Threxell's, yet distorted and fragmented. "Your methods are primitive, your progress laborious." The reflections shifted again, now showing alternate versions of herself, Tracys with neural implants, genetic enhancements, technological augmentations. Each moved through simplified versions of the challenges she'd faced, completing them in fractions of the time she'd required. "You could have been more," the voice continued, now sounding like her mother's. "You chose limitation." Tracy felt doubt creeping in. The voice wasn't wrong. She'd declined the standard enhancement package offered to all human students at the academy, insisting on remaining unaugmented despite recommendations from every advisor. That choice had made every aspect of her education more difficult, every challenge more taxing. "Your stubborn adherence to outdated biological constraints isn't nobility," came another voice, this one like her own. "It's arrogance disguised as principle." The reflections morphed again, now showing images from her childhood, Tracy refusing medical interventions that would have improved her mathematical processing, rejecting neural interfaces that would have allowed her to compete equally with her peers, each memory carefully selected to reinforce her doubts. Tracy closed her eyes, but the voices continued, boring into her mind. "You will fail here, as all unmodified humans must. Your limitations are intrinsic, your methods inadequate. The universe has moved beyond what you are." Tracy reached for her pocket, fingers finding the last pieces of gum. She unwrapped one mechanically and placed it in her mouth, the familiar action centering her thoughts. As she chewed, the mint flavor cut through the psychological assault, grounding her in physical sensation. She opened her eyes and looked at her reflections again. Hundreds of Tracys in various states of failure and self-doubt. But now, she noticed something she'd missed before. In each reflection, no matter how distorted or altered, the Tracy figure still carried something her augmented alternates lacked. A certain tension in the shoulders, a particular furrow of concentration between the brows, signs of effort and struggle that had shaped her throughout her life. "My limitations aren't weaknesses," she said aloud. "They're parameters that forced me to develop different strengths." She removed the gum from her mouth and began to mold it carefully between her fingers. This final marker would be her most important, a complex shape representing not just navigation information but her understanding of the maze itself and her place within it. "You call my methods primitive," Tracy continued, addressing the chamber directly. "But they're adaptable in ways your algorithms struggle to predict." Every constraint became a catalyst for creativity. She looked at the partially formed marker in her hands, then at the hundreds of reflections surrounding her. In each one, she saw the corresponding Tracy working on her own marker, though some were creating different shapes, representing paths not taken. "That's what you've been measuring all along, isn't it? Not just intelligence or problem-solving, but adaptation under constraint, the ability to create new systems when existing ones fail." Tracy completed her marker, a complex spiral with embedded symbols representing every major challenge she'd overcome. She placed it carefully at the center of the platform, her final statement to the maze. "I accept my limitations. They're part of what makes me human. But I refuse to accept arbitrary boundaries on what that humanity can accomplish." The moment the marker touched the platform, the reflective surfaces surrounding her shifted from mirrors to windows. Through them, Tracy could see the actual paths she'd navigated, her gum markers glowing at each junction and challenge point. Together, They formed a complex three-dimensional map of her journey, not just of the physical space, but of her problem-solving evolution. At the same time, other windows showed her classmates in their own versions of the maze. Krelax trapped in an endless loop, his four-dimensional perception confused by recursive spatial anomalies. Zorthan immobilized by probability paralysis, unable to commit to a path when his crystalline mind calculated equal success rates in multiple directions. Neitha overwhelmed by conflicting spectral signals that her compound eyes couldn't filter effectively. Each had been stymied by challenges specifically designed to counter their natural advantages, just as Tracy's journey had been structured to exploit human limitations. But unlike her classmates, she had continuously evolved her approach, treating each constraint as a design parameter rather than an obstacle. The platform beneath her began to descend, carrying her marker with it. The spherical chamber reconfigured itself, the reflective surfaces flowing like liquid to form a new space, a control center filled with displays showing every aspect of her journey through the maze. Tracy watched in amazement as complex algorithms visualized her decision-making processes, mapping her evolving strategies against the maze's adaptive responses. Most striking were the predictive models, showing how the maze had anticipated her moves and how often she had defied those predictions. The display highlighted decision points where her actions had lowest probability according to the maze's human behavior models, moments where she had been most uniquely herself rather than following patterns established by previous human candidates. The floor completed its descent, settling into the true central chamber of the maze. Professor Threxor stood waiting, his skin pulsing with patterns Tracy had never seen before. "Extraordinary," he said, his voice now clear and unmodified. "In 300 years of evaluating candidates, I have never seen anyone use chewing gum as a maze mapping tool." Tracy managed a tired smile. "We work with what we have, Professor." "Indeed." Threxor gestured to the displays surrounding them. "The mind maze is designed to adapt to each candidate's strengths, creating challenges that test their ability to overcome intrinsic limitations. For augmented beings, this often means forcing them to operate outside their enhancements, a significant challenge, but one that still allows them to rely on their base intelligence and sensory processing." He moved closer, examining her final marker with multiple eyes. For an unaugmented human, however, the challenge becomes more fundamental. You have no enhancements to bypass, no augmented senses to diminish. Instead, the maze must challenge your core problem-solving methodology. Tracy looked at the complex displays, seeing her journey from the maze's perspective. It was testing my ability to create systems, not just follow them. Precisely. Threxor's skin rippled with what she now recognized as academic excitement. Most candidates attempt to decode the maze's underlying logic, essentially trying to solve the puzzle on its terms. You recognize the futility of that approach, given your cognitive constraints, and instead developed an external system that evolved alongside the maze's adaptations. He gestured to a particularly complex display showing the evolution of her marking system. Your approach demonstrated exceptional metacognition. You weren't just solving problems. You were actively improving your problem-solving methodology while under extreme pressure. With a fluid movement of his appendages, Threxor produced a small object, a crystalline seal bearing the Academy's insignia. "Tracy Stone, you have completed the Mind Maze Challenge not merely adequately, but with distinction. Your performance ranks among the most innovative solutions in the Academy's history." Tracy accepted the seal, its surface warm and slightly vibrating against her palm. "Thank you, Professor. You have earned more than graduation status." Threxor continued, "I offer you a choice. Return to Earth as our 18th human graduate, or remain at the Academy as co-designer of next year's Mind Maze. Your approach would add a valuable dimension to our testing methodology." Tracy looked at the displays once more, seeing the intricate dance between her evolving strategy and the maze's responses. She thought about the glimpses she'd seen of her classmates' struggles. how their advanced capabilities had become vulnerabilities when faced with challenges specifically designed to counter them. "I'll need time to consider the offer," she said finally. "Of course." Threxer's skin pulsed with what might have been amusement. "Though I suspect I already know your answer. Humans rarely decline opportunities to confound expectations." With a gesture from the professor, the chamber's exit materialized, a doorway leading back to the Academy's great hall where the examination had begun many hours earlier. As Tracy stepped through, she felt the seal in her hand pulse once, synchronizing with her heartbeat. Behind her, the maze was already reconfiguring itself, incorporating elements of her approach into its fundamental architecture. Future candidates would face challenges inspired by her solutions, just as she had navigated a maze shaped by those who came before her. Tracy emerged into the great hall. Blinking in the bright light, her classmates stood in small clusters, some still waiting for their turn, others having returned from failed attempts. They fell silent as they noticed her, eyes and various sensory organs focusing on the seal in her hand. She could feel the subtle weight of their recalibrating perceptions. The unaugmented human was no longer an object of curiosity or dismissal, but a peer who had succeeded where many of them had failed. Some nodded in acknowledgement, others maintained a studied neutrality. Krillax, who had entered first and apparently failed, approached with a respectful inclination of his avian head. "Your method," he clicked in his native tongue, the Academy's translation field rendering his words in standard galactic. "It was unexpected." Tracy smiled, aware of the lingering scent of mint on her fingers. Sometimes the simplest technologies are the most reliable. As she moved through the hall toward her quarters, Tracy felt fundamentally changed. She had entered the maze as a student with something to prove and emerged as someone who had proven something not just to the Academy, but to herself. Her limitations had become her greatest strength, forcing her to develop adaptability and metacognition that her augmented peers had never needed. Professor Threxer watched her go, his skin cycling through patterns of academic satisfaction. She would accept his offer. He was certain. Humans always did when presented with impossible puzzles. It was, perhaps, their most remarkable feature, not their intelligence or their sensory capabilities, but their peculiar relationship with constraints. The maze would be different next cycle, more adaptive, more creative, more attuned to the unexpected approaches that sentient beings devised when confronted with their own limitations. And that, after all, was the true purpose of the Oran Intergalactic Academy, not merely to test the galaxy's brightest minds, but to evolve alongside them. Tracy paused at the hall's exit, looking back at the maze entrance one last time. She could almost feel it pulsing in response to her attention, already incorporating her strategies, preparing new challenges. She smiled and popped her last piece of gum into her mouth. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same resourcefulness that had carried her through the maze, working within her constraints and transforming them into catalysts for innovation. The mint flavor bloomed fresh and familiar on her tongue as she turned and stepped through the doorway, ready for whatever impossible challenges awaited beyond.